I've been thinking about the Seinfeld episode about the tip calculator. Many of you might remember what I'm talking about. I looked it up. It's season 9, episode 15 of Seinfeld. And in the show, Jerry gets his father for his birthday a wizard organizer. I looked up the wizard organizer that's in the show. I looked it up on its Wikipedia page yesterday. I don't know why I said Wikipedia that way. And this organizer can do a lot of things that Jerry got for his dad. And it can be a memo pad. It can be a calendar, a clock, a calculator. It has a keyboard. It has alarms. It does all these functionalities. But when Jerry gives it to his father, and hoping that this tool that he's gotten his father will make his life better, Jerry's father, who lives in a retirement community in Florida, refuses to use it for anything but a tip calculator. He just keeps using it as a tip calculator. No matter what Jerry tells him about all the other things this tool can do, his father will only understand it as a tip calculator. And of course, everything goes wrong at the end because every episode of Seinfeld is basically about a series of terrible humans ruining other people's lives. It's funny, but it's sad. I think I thought about this episode of Seinfeld, this many years old episode of Seinfeld this week, because this episode 4 of the Teaching for Learning Center at the University of Missouri's AI Critical Literacy podcast, really came down to focusing on how we evaluate AI as a possible tool for teaching and learning. The chapters in the book that we're working through in this podcast, Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence, we're looking at chapters 4 and 5 today, lead to that discussion, a discussion of what is the nature of this tool, how should we understand it, how should we use it. And that discussion was enhanced even more by this week's guest, Sam Van Gillern, who is an assistant professor in the University of Missouri College of Education and Human Development. Sam, this was my first chance to talk with Sam. I'm so thankful that he joined the podcast. Sam's research is in digital literacy, especially like in the educational environment. So this is the person we needed to be talking to. So I'm just so thankful for the conversation we had in a nuanced way. I feel like there's so many people who are thinking about AI as a yes or no proposition, thinking absolutely not in my classroom, or maybe the opposite. They're like, absolutely yes. And maybe neither one of those is the right answer. Maybe the right answer is sometimes. Maybe it's maybe. Maybe, to get back to the Seinfeld example, we're thinking about AI as a tip calculator when it's really something else. So I hope this conversation is helpful to you. My name is Gillern and Schroeder. I'm an associate professor at the University of Missouri School of Journalism, and I'm hosting this podcast. And here is my conversation with Sam Van Gillern. I hope you enjoy it and it's as valuable to you as it was for me.
I'm Dr. Sam Van Gillern. I am assistant professor of literacy education in the Department of Learning, Teaching, and Curriculum here at the University of Missouri. My research focuses on digital literacy, so I'm really interested in the way that digital technology mediates teaching, learning, and communication processes. So I teach undergraduate students who are pre-service teachers. I also teach graduate students who are often in-service teachers or who have been in-service teachers, and helping them think about ways that technology can support, literacy learning, teaching, and communication.
So it seems like I'm talking to like the person on campus for literacy then, for digital literacy. Where does AI fit into digital literacy for you?
Yeah, I see AI literacy as being essentially a subset of digital literacies, and one that's, rapidly growing in its importance, as it's something that's impacting learning and teaching, communication, and industry across all fields. So I really see AI literacy, which is I basically consider to be in the same way that I consider digital literacies to be thinking of AI, the effective and responsible and safe use of AI for various purposes. So I think about the same thing for digital literacy. So effective, safe, responsible use for technology.
I know I need to get to the questions I have down here, but like I'm so curious, I'm just curious, like what is an effective, safe, ethical use of AI in teaching, right? If this is a teaching for learning podcast, it's about teaching in the University of Missouri campus and how we should be teaching and learning in an AI world. What are some things that you've already discovered about that?
A couple of things. One of which is something that just popped in my head that in response to your question, is creating questions for student discussion. I think that's a really interesting, easy, safe, responsible, effective use. Teachers need to create questions. They need to organize discussions. They need to prompt students to think about and discuss various topics based on, and that could be in biology, that could be in engineering, that could be in an elementary literacy classroom. Teachers are busy people. Generating questions is a perfect example of how AI can really support the work of teachers.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think I've already been doing that. Like I feel affirmed. Thank you. Like because I like at the end of my class periods, my communication law class periods, I'll usually ask my students like some kind of question like it's pretty easy about like whatever one of the main goals of that class period was, one of the objectives. And then a lot of times I'll come back on the next class period and I'll start class with like I'll use iClicker. I'll come
Mhm.
back with the next class period and be like, hey guys, this is what you said about this. 88% of you got the answer right, and I'm so happy. But for the 16%, or hold on, this is not a math class. For the 12% of the class, we give 104% at the J school. But for the 12 remaining percent of the class, like I'm concerned. Let's talk about this. And it gives me
Yeah.
agency. And I use AI to generate those questions sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example. And sometimes our brains are fried. Sometimes we just don't have a lot of time. Sometimes, I don't know, for example, I've taught a number of classes so many times that I think I'm probably with the majority of instructors that I don't necessarily reread every single chapter or every single article for every single time I teach a class because I've already taught it a bunch of times. But sometimes it can also be helpful for me to just do a quick little refresher, a summary, or creating a couple key points from the article that, yeah, I'm going to go through and kind of skim and scan the article anyway, the way that I've already read it two or three or four times fully. And I've also scanned through it another 5 or 10 times. So it can just be a way for me to save a little bit of time, also get a different, I guess, take from my traditional process of skimming and scanning, and really kind of helping me understand some of the questions that I might ask with my students.
And all these examples have a human in the loop model. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't just farm these questions out and then don't look at them and give them to my students. They're all things that I typically will over ask AI for some question generation. I might say, what are 10 key points? But then I can just pull out the three or four that I really want to dive into. But I think that's a really crucial thing that you mentioned is this human in the loop because, and I think this is I think it's true across a lot of industries and fields, but particularly in education, we don't want our students to be subjected to questions or ideas that don't have at least some vetting and approval from an experienced educator who really wants the best for their students.
Right. The AI doesn't always know what we want. Like it doesn't, most of the time, it doesn't know what I want. You ask it, maybe I'm just bad at prompting, but I ask it and I'm like, that's not it. Try again. And it's like, I'm sorry. And it'll try again. I think, I mean, what we're talking about I got so curious about your introduction that I got off track, but I think I'm not off track. Like I'm on track. I'm just off track of my plan. I want to ask you before we get into the talking about the book chapters. I've asked every guest so far, what was their first experience with artificial intelligence? So what was your first experience?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in a twofold manner, and it relates to a presentation I gave last week also on AI and education. So the first actually it relates to video games and digital games. So I've been a gamer my entire life, and games have been at the forefront of AI in a lot of different ways because they program gaming entities, so like often non-player characters or bots or whatever to play the game. So I've been learning from AI my whole life, and I can think what some of well, I've been playing Mario as a kid, and I know there's probably some really basic AI that might have been involved there. I think about it in a more pronounced fashion with Chess Master, which is a game I played on my computer quite a bit as a kid. Also, I played it before Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov,
Mhm.
the world reigning chess champion. I believe that was in 1996. Um, but I've been learning from AI for since I was a kid. So part A to my response would be I've been learning from games my entire life, including chess, which is definitely a big moment for AI
Mhm.
history when Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov. But I also, through the rest of my life, the AI in games have developed new features, new patterns, new abilities and techniques. So I've been learning from AI my entire life, vis-a-vis video games.
Absolutely. Like, I thank you for that. Like, I don't think a lot of people think of that. So I'm so glad because a lot of us have said Eliza was our first engagement, and the book talks about Eliza in almost every chapter a little bit, and you kind of can't not talk about Eliza. But I mean, I've been playing video games too forever. And you're right. Like when I'm trying to beat Civilization or something like that, I'm engaging with a computer player that is interacting and reacting to actions I take. And that is a sort of AI training. And you're right, computer games are always trying to create realistic non-player characters and things like that. So that's a really good way of thinking, because a lot of people who might be anti or concerned or skeptical about AI in the classroom might be using it every day in their video games and never even thought about it. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Chapter wise, this discussion in the first chapter we're looking at from the Moloch book is talking about AI as a person. And this is something that came up with my conversation with the dean of the engineering school last week. And I just wanted to see what you thought about this. Like he's talking about it, approaching AI as if it were a human. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, what he does in the way I interpret it is I think not necessarily obviously thinking of AI as like a real person, but thinking about AI as one being different than traditional software,
Okay.
which has been often very mechanistic and transparent and consistent in its outputs. So if you put a particular input into, Wolfram Alpha or just a classic calculator or whatever it is, you know that 3 times 3 is 9, and you're going to get that every time. But it's different for AI because AI, we don't necessarily know how it does what it does, and we don't necessarily know why it does what it does, and it's not consistent. And so that, in many ways, I think Moloch's argument is, a lot more like the human brain and how humans act than traditional software. So obviously AI isn't a person, but I think a main point that he's making is not that AI is really a person, but AI behaves, and generative AI more specifically, behaves in a way that is like a person who doesn't necessarily know why they do what they do or why they say what they say. And if you ask them the same thing multiple times in different times or contexts, then they're going to give you a different answer. So I think that was a really central part to thinking about AI as a person. And
So
from
like
that perspective,
my teenagers are basically just like AI then. I'm not sure what answer I'm going to get. It's never consistent, and it's often not what I was hoping to receive. All right, go ahead and
yeah,
interrupt you. Sorry.
you're good. I think, but I think that's kind of a central point. And I think we'll get to this a little bit later in more detail, is that that framing of it, I think could be interpreted in ways that aren't helpful or in many way, or could actually be detrimental to people's well-being because AI isn't a person. Um, and we need to be careful what we entrust with it. I could tell you right now, even though that you will have my my audio recording right now, I could tell you something interesting or personal, and I could trust you to do something responsible with that or do something against my wishes with it. But I can trust you, or at least I have some level of trust of you as another human, and I'm looking at you through the screen. But with AI, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen with that data. And even if I click on this is a temporary chat, I really have no mechanism for enforcing or examining if that actually happens. It might say we're going to delete it in 30 days, but maybe they don't. Or maybe they think something that I said was problematic in some way, even though I thought it was completely benign. And so they flag it and incorporate it into their training model. And I have no idea what happens there. With you, I have some level of trust in a way that I don't think you're going to do something that would negatively impact my well-being or the well-being of the data that I share. With AI, it's not quite the same. So, and then in a different level of it, I think we also need to be really mindful about people using AI intentionally or unintentionally as companions or therapists or something like that. Because even though AI has shown some really good ability for emotional intelligence and thinking about how people might think or react in certain situations, it's not a human. And it can say and do and encourage some behaviors that are really problematic. So AI as a person, as a metaphor for AI being something, an entity that behaves in a way that is unpredictable and inconsistent. Yeah, I get that. But AI as a person in terms of can we really trust it, or could it lead us down a path that leads to some substantial problems if we really kind of take that metaphor too far? I think that's also an issue to consider.
I hope it's helpful to people to think of it like exactly like that, because I would argue that this is part of AI critical literacy, is this user or not user, whatever decision an instructor on this campus wants to make about AI, that thinking about it through these frames might help them process what their position is on it. Like the author does a nice job talking about how it's a predictive model, right? And I think you sort of brought that up, right? That it's not coming, like when we're talking, I'm hopefully trying to be a genuine human. I'm connecting with, like you said, we're connecting on a human level. It's incapable of that. It's only capable of trying to emulate human behavior, and it's doing it through a prediction model, right? And I mean, would I be accurate in saying that the predictive model is one of the really crucial differences between a real human and an AI entity?
Yeah, I think in many ways, yes, and particularly if you think about the total number of tokens that they use and the calculations that the tokens are based on, and the probability with all those things, absolutely, because humans don't process information that way. We have no way of thinking. A lot of these have like billions of parameters, and humans just aren't wired like that. We typically break things down into like one or two logical explanations, if we're lucky, and we just stick with those and kind of forget about all the other things that happen. So we humans and AI interpret information in fundamentally different ways. And the raw quantity and complexity of the essentially mathematical calculations and probabilities is fundamentally different than how humans process information.
One of the things that was really interesting in the same regard is the creativity. I thought that was really interesting. And the author talks about this, how I would not expect an AI entity to be somewhat creative and actually better at creative assistance to humans than for like math. I would think, oh, AI, it's a computer program. Computer program's going to nail math, but they're not going to get art. But it does seem like it checked out in my uses of AI when I was reading his chapter and I was being skeptical. It checked out that I have had more success playing and engaging with AI on artistic levels than I have had on using it for math.
It doesn't necessarily surprise me in the way that with a lot of creative processes, there's not necessarily a right answer or a wrong answer in the way that there is with math. So if you think about, if we're just going to take that idea of why is it better potentially at creativity than math, well, it's because with math, there is really only one right answer potentially. But with art, or with question asking, or with story generation, there's not really a right answer or a wrong answer. But some things are more interesting and attractive, and if we like some elements of it, we can prompt it to go a little further down that path. So I think that might have something to do with it. Most of the way that I've engaged with it personally has really kind of been related more to brainstorming, and a little bit of drafting of ideas. But it doesn't necessarily surprise me that it's good with those things, because there's not a right answer or wrong answer the same way that there is with, math or chemistry.
It's dawning on me even now that even though I've been playing with it and I've been reading about it, it really is a better assistant when it comes to creative tasks than for any. That's like part of literacy, is knowing how a tool should or could be used and maybe what its strengths and weaknesses are. And it seems like if we're thinking about it for teaching and learning, it's going to be more helpful to people who are, like you said, brainstorming, need some assistance with ideas. It's interesting because we could have a whole debate about whether AI can really truly create something, right? Because I think people in the arts might be really insulted with the idea that AI could create something, because it doesn't come from us. It doesn't come from a human experience, the heart or the emotions of the human. But at the same time, I've been surprised by AI. It surprises me all the time. I ask it questions. I had it ask an image generator to create the most American image it could possibly create one time. I was like, I would not have thought of this, but you nailed it. Interestingly, I asked it to create the most un-American image it could think of, and it would not do it. The guardrails protected it from being not patriotic sufficiently, apparently.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that this is hopefully really helpful to people to think about when they're like, how, if they decide they do want to experiment with AI in the classroom, to think about how to do it, the brainstorming, asking for test questions, asking for discussion questions, asking students to use it as a tool to discuss things, not as the final word, as a tool is much more effective than asking it to run a series of calculations for you, using it as a cheat code for your trigonometry homework or whatever.
Yeah.
One of the other things that is related that the author talked about is Turing's article, the Computer, Machinery, and Intelligence article.
Hmm.
It was published in 1950. I love this article. Like, I know that only a nerd would love an academic article this much, but he mentions it in the chapter, and I 100% agree. It's a 75-year-old article, and it doesn't know anything about the internet, computers at all the way we understand them, artificial intelligence, none of this. Yet it's actually incredibly relevant.
Yeah, well, I've been familiar with the concept of the Turing test for a long time,
Yeah.
just as someone who's generally, a tech enthusiast as well as computing and gaming enthusiast. So I haven't read the article in its original form, but I'm familiar with the concept of the Turing test, and I think Malik does a nice job at kind of couching that, this is obviously a test of limited scope and it focuses on linguistic performance and doesn't address so many other countless things that humans engage with and different types of intelligence, whether it be emotional intelligence or social intelligence or whatever it might be. But I think it's a really fascinating place to start. And even if you go beyond, okay, well, we have this original test of you're a human is communicating with two different actors, one of which is a computer or AI actor, the other which is another human actor. I think it is, if we go beyond, written language, or then we can maybe transfer it to oral language, which obviously wouldn't have been possible back then, but now we can have very conversational pieces with AI and oral language, which is really fascinating. I remember the first time I did this, it was with, I think it was ChatGPT's. I forget the name of the bot at the time. Maybe it was Sky. It kind of sounded like Scarlett Johansson, and
Yeah, that was the whole thing. Yeah.
yeah,
It
and
used
I
her
asked
voice
about the
intentionally
I
without
asked
her
about the
permission.
history of video games and what's the best video game ever, and it talked about Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which is, you know, it's
Yeah.
it's very plausible, and I think it's a good answer. If you had to pick one, I think that's pretty fair, and did a good job. But I asked why it was popular, and this is a really conversational time, and I was just cleaning up a couple things in the kitchen while I had my headphone in, and I'm having this conversation. So. That's obviously beyond the written language that goes to oral language. But then what about creating things such as art or persuasive essays or whatever it is? It really kind of takes it to a new level these days. And then at this point, there's a lot of things that AI just does so much better than humans. So if you think about AlphaFold from DeepMind, now a subsidiary of Google, that basically cracked the protein folding, which used to take a single doc student 4 or so years to map out a single protein structure. And now AlphaFold has done, I believe, almost all of them, so that we know of. There are some things that AI is just really incredible at, and others that it's not quite as incredible at. And I think he does a nice job. I think he refers to kind of this idea as a jagged frontier of it does a really good job with some things, but not nearly as good of a job with other things that you'd predict or expect it to be good at based on your past experience with software.
And I think that the jagged frontier makes sense and it's helpful because there's a lot of faculty on campus. And I mean, I'm skeptical about AI and its role as well. There's a lot of faculty who are just, they don't want to try it. They're just like hard no. And it's maybe helpful for them to think of it instead of it's all the same. It's just AI. It's just this thing as, it's not right for my class or it's not right for my research area, or it is, or it is really strong in this area and I should use it. It's like thinking of it not simply as a yes, no proposition, but what is AI good at? What is it not good at? Can it help my students? Can it help me in my teaching or can it not? Is probably, I think, a much healthier approach than hard no, hard yes. I'm all in or I'm not in.
Yeah.
It's possible just like the opposite. There's faculty on campus who are way into AI and it's absolutely the wrong fit for what they're teaching. And,
Hmm.
because I think that we probably haven't talked enough on this podcast, and this is the fourth episode about how faculty should not be using AI. I should be thinking about for the future. I just want to add that I was really hesitant. I brought the Turing article from 1950 into a class last spring for my students to read, and I was skeptical. I was nervous that they would find it to be irrelevant. because it's from 1950, which is to them, I mean, it's a long time for me, but like, to them, it's just like that's like the 1700s to them. They're just like, what even is, because they think everything old is, everything is just old. Like the world didn't really start till they showed up, and the students loved that article. Like they wanted to talk about that. It was a seminar class. It's a graduate class. They loved that. They wanted to talk about that article, and I thought that was really interesting how even passed the student test, that it being that old, knowing so little about the internet, the just the world information we live in now, how much the students loved that. And one of the things I think they liked is Turing actually lists arguments against his argument systematically in the article, and it's almost like you could read for people who are skeptical about AI, they could read it and be like, oh, I see. Like one of the arguments, if I remember right from his article, is that AI can't really, or not, he doesn't say AI, computers can't really ever create anything new. And I'm like, well, that's what people say about AI. Like it's prescient how this article is. So if anybody hasn't looked into it, it's a pretty easy to find article. It's been around for 75 years. It's not like there's non-paywall behind versions of it.
Yeah.
Also think about AI as a creative. The author had an entire chapter devoted to AI as a creative entity. One of the things he says at the beginning, and it's part of his principles that we talked about in the last podcast episode, is that we should always invite AI to the table. Do you think we should always invite AI to the table?
No. No, I think it's I like maybe the spirit of it, and maybe it's not something to take too literally. Um, maybe it just sounds better than be open to inviting AI to the table or do it most of the time. However, I don't know, and something I guess contextually for me as someone who's in literacy education, and I work primarily with pre-service teachers who are going to be elementary school teachers, is, I think a lot about age appropriateness and developmental appropriateness for all of this stuff.
It's true.
So, do I want to invite AI to help some 7-year-old in an unsupervised setting, help this girl learn to read or write? Definitely not. There's just way too much that we don't know about things, and at this point, and probably forever to some degree, we really need to keep human in the loop with children's early literacy development. Not to say that it can't play a part, but at this point in time, I don't think there's any need to really rely on AI heavily for K-3 literacy instruction. It might help in some way teachers, but in terms of just letting it loose for having 7-year-olds invite AI to the table, I don't think so. But from a broader perspective of inviting AI to the table, I think a better way to frame it would be open to having AI at the table and think, how might AI be able to help, or how might AI actually kind of slow down or hinder my processes. So I'm happy, and to be honest, I'm a person who, generally speaking, I'm very open to having AI at the table, but do I always invite AI to the table? Definitely not.
You would agree with always consider having AI at the table.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of framing it.
Okay. So just a slight edit, like we could put in the notes. Always consider, like I think that's fair. I'm skeptical that it should always be there with
Hmm.
us. So there's times when it should not. He talks about creativity a lot in these chapters, and I thought that was really interesting, like we already talked about. But he brought up the hallucination problem, which has a lot of people, I feel like, are just they're like, well, I can't use AI because it hallucinates. I'm like, well, I hate to break it to you, but people are inaccurate all the time too, like a
Yeah, yeah.
lot. It's not so much that AI isn't 100% accurate. I think we should have reasonable expectations of the technology like we have of people, that sometimes it's just wrong. And sometimes people are confidently wrong, just like AI is. But he's saying that this hallucination nature of it is part of what makes it good at creativity. And I
Hmm.
thought I'd absolutely never thought of it that way. Moloch actually argues that AI don't actually know anything, which I thought was interesting. Because in
Hmm.
some ways they have a world of knowledge it's not their fingertips, they're fake non-human fingertips. It struggles to be predictive is the problem. It's predictable, as you've already talked about. Is there anything that you thought about in that passage, where he was talking about the creativity and the hallucination that came to your mind with the lenses you have because of your literacy background?
Yeah, well, I guess a couple things. So I think a central reason, and it's not a flaw, this randomness. It's by design.
Right.
So if you think about these probabilistic models, they introduce an element of randomness. I think sometimes they refer to it as heat, where you can kind of have more randomness or less randomness. So you can kind of turn up the dial or back in certain models, not necessarily in every model. Um, but I think he's right is that, but that's also how humans function in many ways, right? Is there is a level of randomness to when something really interesting and great comes to us. And this could be just something that we randomly see on the street that just pops in our head, or it could be a thought that, we were recalling for some reason, then we develop some new insight or perspective on it. We can't necessarily predict the things that happen, but I think a lot of great creativity happens from randomness. I don't know why I'm thinking about it right now, but I'm sure there was a lot of really random things that happened to the Beatles along the way that really inspired greatness in their songs. That if there wasn't that particular moment in that particular time in one of their heads, then one of these songs never would have happened. Let It Be, for example, it was a dream. It was based on a dream that Paul McCartney had of his mother who had, and I believe this is all right, and I'm pretty sure that it is, that his mother had passed. And he was going through a difficult time, and she came to him, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And so here's just one random little dream, and not to say little, but a random important dream that Paul McCartney had that became what, is maybe one of the most famous songs in rock history. So I think, does it surprise me that randomness and is part of the creativity? Not at all, because I think humans and are the same way.
One of the parts of AI critical literacy then would be to have a realistic expectations for what the tool can do. Like we
Hmm.
have, I have hopefully realistic expectations of what my car can do, or what
Hmm.
my smartphone, my used broken smartphone can do, right? So like
Hmm.
when you're approaching AI and its applications for teaching and learning, have an idea of what it can do and what I can't do, and don't ask it to do things it's not made for. Just like we shouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail. Like it's just not
Yeah.
made for that. I feel like I'm being very AI positive today, and people could be like, on the previous three episodes, you were the devil's advocate a lot of times, and I
Mhm.
haven't changed. I guess I'm just thinking along with it more today. I'm being random.
Yeah.
I'm being
Those things happen. Our moods make a difference. The random things, did you have time for breakfast this morning? Did you not? Or what did you have? Like there's so many different things that affect everything that happens in our head and everything that we think and say and do, that our lives are really random in so many countless ways, and that's really what makes it beautiful. And I think that's also what makes AI, interacting with AI and also AI output, so interesting and rewarding in many ways, is to kind of, you have the sense of discovery about these new ideas.
It has absolutely surprised me. I'll ask it something like, because I research communication and free expression, and I'll be like, what are the 10 most important cases that were written by this Supreme Court justice? And I recognize these nine. What is this 10th one? And I'll look it up and be like, oh my gosh, how did I not see this before?
Hmm.
Or maybe it'll give me 10 and three of them. I'm just like, that's not what I asked at all. But
Hmm.
even if there's just one I didn't know, the tool has been helpful. But I have to have the literacy to know that the three cases that were not even relevant, I have to know, be like, okay, that one doesn't make sense. Like to be able to evaluate the information. So you have to come to the tool with some knowledge, maybe of what you're asking, in order
Yeah.
to be able to identify whether it's on track or not with its answer. Because a lot of times our queries are not ideal, or it misinterprets our queries because of the
Yeah.
tokens we're talking about. When a human asks a question, we it's like we hear the question as a whole, I think. But when the AI tool receives a query from us, like you said, it's tokening, it's kind of splitting it into all these little pieces. And in the splitting, I think it loses the human context. It never had it. One of the things it was saying, the author was saying about the hallucination problem, was the reason why we often struggle with the falsity from AI is because it's so plausible.
Hmm.
Because it's a predictive model that is meant to be right almost all the time. When it's wrong, it makes sense that it would, like, the answer seems plausible because it's contextually accurate. It was accurate to the computer, and it's accurate to us if we don't know better. Maybe that's an important AI thought. for teaching and learning too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as you mentioned briefly earlier about how humans are often confidently wrong as well. So we expect computers to be correct about many, many things. Whether it be adding up things in your Excel file or being able to search online for some particular information. We expect some degree of accuracy because we kind of interpret computers as being these entities that can do a lot of really complex things and have a lot of information that we can draw from. So being able to really, and I think this kind of comes back to the theme of AI critical literacy, is having a degree of skepticism for when we interact with AI, I think is really important. And I think it's perhaps the most fundamentally important thing as relates to engaging with AI. But as time goes on, and another central idea from Malik's book is that think about the AI you're currently using is the worst
Right.
AI you'll ever use
Right.
for the rest of your life, essentially.
Yeah.
And you've already see that quite a bit over the last couple of years, since ChatGPT was released, almost 30 months ago in November of 2022, is it doesn't make nearly as many errors. And a lot of the stuff that I search, I think it's accurate. And I look at it, and if it's something really important, like if I'm buying a house or whatever, then maybe I want to talk with an expert or whatever. But simultaneously, for most of the stuff, if I'm interested in looking for a new TV or like a new laptop or whatever, it can do a lot of the work for me. Particularly, I've really been enjoying lately the deep research feature that I have access to on Advanced Gemini or Gemini Advanced, where basically I task it with something. I might say I'm interested in building a new computer, or I'm interested in getting a new TV, or I want to learn more about how this particular thing in the world functions. And then it'll go and it'll review 30 to 150 plus websites, and it'll take like 3 or 5 minutes, and it'll give you a report about whatever the topic is. Do I go through with a fine-tooth comb to ensure that every little price is right for these different computer models that I'm interested in building? No, but it does a good enough job that I couldn't really as easily expect it from just a Google search. I think for the most part, and all this is to come back with, I think it's getting pretty dang good at not necessarily having as many hallucinations. I think the issue related to references, this is a thing as well, is that now deep research, and I think other models have these, they'll post a link to the reference. It can save a lot of time. So if it's a really crucial thing for your life that needs to be 100% precise, then check it out. But simultaneously, I think it's going to be easier and easier, and it's a big problem, admittedly, where people are going to outsource a lot of their research and thinking to a black box that they don't understand
Right.
why it's outputting what it's outputting. But it's plausible, and to be honest, most of the time it's right. Most of the time, for most people, is good enough.
I think there's people who are having heart palpitations, but yeah, that's because like the idea that like because I'm concerned with the flow of information and ideas in my research, and the idea that we could outsource this is like you said, it's a black box. We're outsourcing it to a corporation, and social media corporations already showed us that they're not necessarily in it for the good of free expression and discourse and the flow of ideas, that they're in it for profit motives, which is just what they are, and that we shouldn't think of them as creating public spaces. And it might be the same with AI. We shouldn't assume that the AI entities are in it for the same reasons we're in it. I'm in it to, really share with my students these important principles and concepts, and I really care about what I'm teaching. If I just use AI to prep for my courses, it's going to be limited to what the corporation that owns the AI tool wants it to share or wants us to know.
Yeah.
And that can affect it can limit the range of potential information our audiences. If I want to ask it what is the most un-American image you can think of and it won't draw it, that's an interesting tell. If I want to ask it, like I was during the election, tell me about Kamala Harris. And I think it was Gemini who would not, it simply said, I cannot comment about the election at all, or something like that. It would not inform me as a voter about one of the candidates. I didn't actually ask it about Trump, but it wouldn't inform me about one of the two candidates. And that was interesting. It's a choice.
And so you bring up really good points but when the examples you shared, it's been some pretty transparent saying I'm not doing that.
Right.
What's more insidious
Yes.
is when the organization or the developer has a motive or maybe has some sort of agreement with third parties about what it shares or how it frames things, then it becomes a different thing because it's saying, I'm not going to do that. Fair. And to be honest, that's probably great in a lot of contexts.
It's
What's
transparent.
more insidious is when it does things and shapes public opinion and
Right.
the opinion of individuals for some ulterior motive, but doesn't share any information about how that is actually occurring.
Right. So we never know. Someone who doesn't have like extensive knowledge into something doesn't know that they're receiving a potentially limited or biased source of set of information.
Yeah, and so like just another an idea that kind of pops into my head about it. I don't think it's happening at this point in time, but for example, I'm a person who's spent a good amount of time in Latin America, and I enjoy traveling to Latin America, and it's a place that I enjoy going, and I want to go explore new places. But so I've actually tasked deep research on Gemini Advance with like what would be 10 great places for me to go in Latin America or whatever. And so it gives me its 10, and maybe I give it a couple things like it would be it has a beach or it's an affordable cost of living or whatever like that. And then it gives me the 10 that I request, which is great. But what if there's actually some travel agencies or some airlines who are paying this
Right.
model behind the back and I don't know about it. And then the model is actually feeding me to use these airlines or to visit these particular places, not because they're really the best places to go or they match my desires, but because they're getting paid on the back end and I have no idea about it.
That's really good thought. That's really good thought. And I mean, it makes me think about the concept of net neutrality, which is the idea that the internet should be neutral from those sorts of influences, meaning like Disney can't have internet service providers throttle down Netflix's service because it doesn't want to compete with them. Net neutrality is kind of dead already on its own, but there's absolutely nothing net neutrality wise about the AI marketplace right now. So that's a really good point. I wanted to ask you before I get to a few last questions, when we're still talking about the creativity chapter, I had three questions I really want to ask. They're all clustered together. One is, what is an example of a terrible use for AI in the educational setting?
Yeah, well, I think I've already addressed it a little bit,
Okay.
but like unmonitored use with young children.
Okay. There you
Yeah,
go.
that's just something that uh, I'm really, these are young people. And even if, we can define young different ways, but I think elementary is definitely young. High school, I think we probably need to start helping students a lot who are in high school developing their AI literacy skills. And to be honest, we can probably do it with, and I have done it to be honest, with younger children, elementary students as well. But it's in supervised activities where there's always an adult who's doing the driving with the system. But I'm really concerned about, I don't know, as someone who loves technology and sees so much benefit and potential with it, I'm also concerned that we're outsourcing too much of the student learning experience to screens in general,
Oh
in
yeah.
a way that negatively impacts their social relationships and their academic performance because they spend so much time staring at a screen, and every moment they stare at a screen is one moment less they're looking at another person in the face.
All right.
And that's really concerning. So, the same way that I'm concerned about an over-reliance of digital technology, particularly in education with young children, I'm also concerned about AI being one of the things that does that, just with this new spin.
As a father of three teenage boys, it is a minute by minute struggle to get them off their damn phones, just to look around. And what you just said about social skills, like that is exactly what I've said to my 15-year-old is like, every minute you're playing Fortnite, every minute you're staring at your phone, you're not developing human skills. Okay, the other question, so that's a terrible use. What is an example of an ideal use of AI as a tool in an educational setting? We might have already covered that at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. I think brainstorming ideas, and you also can think about it from a teacher perspective or a student perspective, and they often go hand in hand, obviously. But brainstorming ideas or questions, create like having teachers create materials for students to engage with. Obviously, teachers need to vet the materials, make sure that it's accurate. But to be honest, for the most part, for the stuff that I'm interested in, it does a pretty good job at doing that. But we obviously, need to vet it as teachers. Creating images is something that I think is really interesting as someone who personally who's never developed an artistic ability past the second grade level, I've been really empowered by using AI to create images that I can use to help share stories. And so I've personally worked on with college students developing children's literature with AI. So my college students, they'll brainstorm some ideas and they can write some stuff themselves or get feedback themselves, and then they can create images with AI. And now all of a sudden, educators can create interesting children's literature that can often be tailored to the interest of students. So maybe you want to do it on lizards, or maybe you want to do it on horses or a fairy tale theme or whatever. Now they can really create interesting high quality images to support children's literacy engagement. So I think creating materials, including children's literature, is pretty cool. Providing feedback on writing, I think, is also a one that there's a lot of promise with, but we don't want to overdo it, particularly if kids are just outsourcing their writing to AI, which is really, that gets to another big concern is when and how will Gen AI really negatively impact students' writing abilities. And it's not just about the writing, but it's about the thinking that goes on behind the writing.
Writing
About what
is
do I want to share? How do I want to frame it? What do I not want to share? It's not just writing for writing's sake. Writing is fundamentally a process that has unique forms of thinking where we have to slow down and think about the message we want to share and how to present it. And if students, and it's already happening in many ways,
right.
if they outsource their writing to AI, they're also outsourcing their thinking to AI, and that's a big concern.
That's Thank you. That's a really good point. Like I've listened to my sons talk about how they're using AI for their writing, and part of me died, and it probably never came back to life. Having teenage sons is awesome, by the way. It's really helped my self-esteem and my understanding of myself. It is brutal. I wanted to make sure before we finish that we got to hear more about your research. I think we've already succeeded in incorporating it throughout, so I'm really happy about that. But based on your research in literacy and digital literacy, what else can you tell us about AI critical literacy and what faculty should know and think about when they're teaching with AI or thinking about teaching with AI?
Yeah, so one study I'm really pleased with, and it's currently under review, is I surveyed over 1,000 teachers from around the country, literacy teachers across the K-12 spectrum, on among a lot of things actually, but one subset of it was on their perceived benefits and concerns of AI in literacy education. So then I qualitatively coded this information, the data, with a couple peers, a couple co-researchers, and we found benefits in terms of, so 5 benefits and 5 primary concerns that emerged from our data analysis. For the benefits were time efficiency, creating and modifying content, brainstorming, evaluation and feedback, and preparing for the future. And preparing for the future is an idea that basically AI is not going anywhere. We need to help students develop their ability to understand it and utilize it in responsible, safe, and productive ways. And so that's kind of the spirit there. Their primary concerns were related to unreliability of AI output, cheating and plagiarism,
Mhm.
limiting student development, dependency, and a diminished human experience. And that last one of diminished human experience is, well, if AI can now create sonnets and songs and interesting artwork, then what does that mean for human creators, as you've suggested? But even beyond that, what does it mean for the connection that we have with art? Because I don't know, are we just going to be flooded with all this AI created art and stories? And it really kind of takes away from what it means to be human. So I think the benefits and concerns are really interesting. I framed these, not necessarily these specifically on a one-to-one basis, but as part of the broader study in terms of this concepts from media literacy on empowerment and protectionism. So I really think that these ideas of empowerment and protectionism can and probably should be central to AI literacy initiatives at MU and beyond, because it has that, I think, a really solid, we could say, balanced approach in thinking about protectionism. So, what are ways we can identify and mitigate and address problematic experiences, which could be related to cheating or negative impact on student learning or misinformation or whatever. but also empowerment. So how can we productively use AI tools for our various goals in our personal, academic, and professional lives? So I think these ideas, these central ideas of empowerment and protectionism, should be integrated in across courses because it doesn't matter. You could be talking about a bio course or a journalism course or a science education course, and thinking about that. Okay, well, we need to understand and mitigate negative and problematic experiences, but we also should recognize that there's some value for empowerment and productive use. I think those are two concepts that stem from media literacy research that I think are really valuable for helping educators conceptualize important issues to address in their teaching.
It's a really nuanced approach, right? There's, again, like, I appreciate the faculty on campus who are just like, oh, hell no, never AI. And I guess we can look at the other end of the spectrum, the people who are run full on into the burning building and like, I'm going to try it, right?
Hmm.
But the nuanced approach that you're presenting here is, let's consider carefully what this can do for you, and let's consider carefully how we can address the problems it's creating for you. It's a constructive approach, so I really appreciate that. I guess my
Yeah.
last question would be, and it's just completely related to this too, what would you say to a faculty member or instructor on this campus who is really hesitant to try AI, but maybe, as the next semester rolls around, they kind of feel like they should try something. They're thinking about building whatever class it is. What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, I think stemming from the previous ideas, explaining these concepts of empowerment and protectionism and thinking about how it relates to their class and their field is really helpful. I think beyond that, having open conversations and clear expectations makes a lot of sense. Just to say no use of AI or we're not going to do it because this isn't how we do this, people work in this field. I think in some ways is problematic because AI is going to influence all fields. I really believe it. We need to be mindful of that and kind of in some ways just recognize that we need to understand it ourselves in ways that uh, we can help with our students as well. Beyond, I guess, those couple things is just the recognition that students need to develop flexible skills to participate successfully and to be prepared for the workforce that they're entering, not only in 2 years or 5 years, but in 10 years or 20 years. And so AI is going to perhaps influence this more than any other technology almost ever, because now there's this inorganic intelligence that is really transforming society in a way where it can identify patterns, it can make decisions, it can create new content in a way that the printing press or the telegraph or the typewriter could not. So this is really influencing everything, and we can't just brush it in under the rug. Ultimately, thinking about empowerment and protectionism is really important in ways that help students develop skills to understand and navigate the AI landscape, as well as be flexible for whatever thing's going to be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years. Because I think the people who are going to have the most trouble with employment and their livelihoods in 10 or 20 or 30 years are people who haven't developed some flexibility to engage with these technologies in a transforming and rapidly evolving landscape.
That's probably a really good ending point. So thank you so much, Sam, I'm really glad I reached out to you. I think this is really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the opportunity, Jared. I'm really excited that we had such a great conversation and appreciative for the opportunity.